Hello, I'm Olivia. I was 57 when the letter arrived, but the words inside it aged me in a single breath. It was one of those quiet July mornings when the air feels clean and innocent, like nothing bad is allowed to happen before noon. The envelope had my name written in a familiar hand, Marina's hand, my school friend from the town where everything began, where my knees used to be scraped and my heart used to be brave. I stood on my porch and read. He died on a quiet July morning. Until his last breath, he uttered your name. Come to the reading of the will. You will be shocked. He left you almost everything. Sebastian. Even just seeing his name felt like stepping into cold water. Shock first, then a rush of memories that made my skin prickle. I must have read it 5 times before my brain accepted the sentence as real. We hadn't seen each other in 30 years. 30. That's long enough for children to become adults, for parents to become photographs, for love to become either a gentle nostalgia or a sharp regret. Sebastian was not gentle nostalgia. He was the boy my parents forbade. My mother had said it as if she were saving me from drowning. You will not marry a poor boy, Olivia. My father had been more blunt. Love doesn't pay the electric bill. So I did what obedient girls did back then. I married stability. Stability's name was Oliver. He was a financier with clean nails, clean suits, and a smile that never touched his eyes. He talked about portfolios like they were living beings. He could make strangers feel small with a glance and make me feel lucky to be chosen with a single compliment. I didn't understand, at 20, that some men use charm the way others use rope. 40 years later, 40 years of his business dinners, his conferences, his phone turned face down on the table. What I had was not a marriage. It was a contract I had never negotiated. Inside the house, Oliver's voice floated out from the living room, sharp with that special kind of entitlement that thinks it's normal. Liv, you coming in? I need the car in an hour. Need. Always need. I folded Marina's letter slowly, like folding a flag at a funeral. My hands shook not just from grief, not just from shock, but from something else too. A door had opened, and it was a door that led back to the only decision I'd ever regretted with my whole body. I walked inside, placed the letter on the kitchen counter, and stared at it like it might move. Oliver glanced up from the television. What's that? Sebastian died, I said. For a moment, he looked confused. Then he did that thing men do when they recognize a name they weren't supposed to have to compete with anymore. The vineyard guy? He asked, as if Sebastian were a brand of lawnmower. Yes. Oliver's eyebrows rose. Why do you care? You haven't seen him in what, forever? I watched my husband's face, my almost ex, even then, though I didn't know I'd already started calling him that in my mind, and I realized something simple and devastating. Oliver had never understood me. He had understood my usefulness, my reliability, my quietness. He had understood that my parents raised me to keep my lips closed and my disappointments tucked away like laundry. But he didn't know my heart had once wanted to run. He left me something, I said. That got his attention. Of course it did. How much? He asked, leaning forward. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I don't know, I said, but I'm going. Oliver snorted. Don't be ridiculous. You're not going halfway across the state for some sentimental nonsense. I smiled, and it surprised even me, small, controlled, polite. Oh, Oliver, I said, you've confused me with the woman you married. Then I went upstairs and packed a bag like someone preparing to step into her own life. The drive back to my hometown was a ribbon of familiar roads and unfamiliar emotions. The trees looked taller. The gas stations looked smaller. Even the sky looked different, as if the town had been keeping it polished in my absence. Marina met me at her door with red-rimmed eyes and a tight mouth. I didn't know if you'd come, she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lemon cleaner and old grief. I didn't know if I could stay away, I admitted. We sat at her kitchen table with coffee neither of us drank. He talked about you, she said quietly. Not every day. Not like a man stuck in a trance. But whenever something good happened, whenever he opened a new section of vineyard, whenever a bottle won an award, he would say, Olivia would have laughed at this, or Olivia would have liked that label better. My throat tightened. He never married? I asked, though I already knew. Marina shook her head. He said he'd already promised himself once. Sebastian was dramatic, I murmured, trying to make it sound like a joke. My voice didn't cooperate. Marina reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The will reading is tomorrow morning. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, the house that had sat empty for years, waiting like a pause sentence. Dust had softened the corners of everything. The air smelled like old wood and a faint hint of my mother's perfume. Even though she'd been gone long enough, that smell should have faded into nothing. I lay awake listening to the dark. I remembered being 19, standing on the same floor, my mother insisting I wear the pearl necklace Oliver bought me. I remembered Sebastian showing up the night before my wedding, his hair damp from rain, his eyes bright and wild. "Come with me," he'd said, breathless. "Right now. I have a car. We'll drive until the road forgets our names." I'd stood in my doorway, heart pounding, hands clenched so tightly my nails left crescents in my palms. "I can't," I'd whispered. My parents, he'd looked at me like I was choosing my own coffin. "I'll make something," he'd said. "I swear I will." And I had watched him walk away into the rain, my whole future sliding shut behind him. Now he was dead, and my past had reached out and grabbed my wrist. The lawyer's office was small and overly cold, as if grief required refrigeration. Sebastian's relatives were already there. Cousins I barely remembered, an uncle with a face like dried leather, a woman with diamond earrings and a smile that didn't belong on a human being. They looked at me like I was an unexpected line item. Marina sat beside me, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap like she'd trained herself not to tremble. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Sebastian Moreau." The room shifted. People leaned forward. Greed isn't always loud, sometimes it's just a slight tilt of the head. The lawyer began listing. "To my uncle Lucien Moreau, my father's pocket watch." Lucien nodded, satisfied, as if time itself had been restored to him. "To my cousin Elise, the antique cufflinks from my office desk." Elise's lips curved, pleased. "To my cousin Henry, the oil painting from the hallway." Henry's eyes narrowed, already calculating resale value. The gifts kept coming, small and specific. Personal items, keepsakes, the kind of things you leave when you're saying, "I remember you existed, but I am not rewarding you." Murmurs started soft at first, then sharper. "That's it," someone hissed. "What about the vineyard?" Another muttered. The lawyer held up a hand. "Please, there is more." Marina's shoulders tightened. Then came the part that made the room go still. "To my sister, Marina Moreau, the family house on Sycamore Street." Marina's eyes filled, and she blinked rapidly, jaw clenched as if tears were an insult she refused to offer anyone. The lawyer continued. "To Olivia Hart." Every head turned toward me. I felt heat rise up my neck. My skin prickled. My palms went damp. It was the sensation of being judged by strangers and ghosts at the same time. "I leave my vineyards, my winery business, and all associated assets, including brand rights and equipment. I also leave the bank account held under the business name, containing," he checked the paper, $4,312. There was a pause, and then the room erupted. Elise spat, as if I were something she'd found under her shoe. "This is insane," Lucien snapped. Henry stood abruptly. "We should contest this." The diamond earring woman laughed, sharp and ugly. "He left the business to a woman he hasn't seen in 30 years? That's not romance. That's dementia." Marina stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Her voice cut through the chaos. "He was not demented. He was Sebastian." It didn't stop them. They started talking over each other, outrage blooming like mold. I sat frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Sebastian had done this. He had reached beyond death and placed an entire life in my lap. I wanted to stand and say something sensible, something graceful. Instead, I heard myself say, quietly but clearly, "I can't take this." The room stilled for half a breath, just long enough for everyone to hear it, and then they surged again. "You hear that?" Lucien scoffed. "She knows it's wrong." The lawyer lifted his voice. "The will is valid. Mr. Moreau's signature has been verified. There is no evidence of coercion." I turned to Marina, my eyes wide. "I can't," I repeated, softer like confession. "This is too much." Marina leaned close to me, her voice low and fierce. "You have to. That was his last will. But his family, they are not his heart," she said. "You were." Her words punched the air out of my lungs. The meeting ended in a storm of anger. People brushed past me like I carried disease. One cousin muttered something about gold diggers. I almost laughed. If only they knew, if only they understood how little gold I'd dug in my life, how much of myself I'd buried instead. Outside the office, Marina took my arm and guided me into her car. "You're shaking," she said. So are you, I replied. She stared straight ahead. Sebastian knew exactly what he was doing. I swallowed. Why would he leave me the bank account with only a few $1,000s? Marina's mouth twitched sad and amused at once. Because he had a wicked sense of humor. He knew the relatives would think you got everything, and then they'd hear the number and lose their minds. That's cruel. It's Sebastian, she corrected gently, and it's also protection. If you choose to walk away, Olivia, they'll say you never deserved it. But if you accept it and succeed, they can choke on their own assumptions. Succeed. The word sounded like a dare. I stared out the window at the familiar streets, the old diner, the church where my mother used to stare at other women's dresses like it was her job. Could I do it? Could I take a business built by the man I didn't choose? Could I step into a life I had refused? The most frightening answer was also the most honest. I had nothing to lose. Oliver called that evening. His voice was clipped, suspiciously controlled. So, what did he leave you? I smiled at the ceiling of my childhood room. The plaster had a crack shaped like a lightning bolt. I remembered staring at it as a girl, imagining it was a sign that something exciting would happen to me. Everything, I said. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Well, that changes things. I heard the calculation in his breath. It changes nothing, I corrected. Olivia, he said, voice softening. Be reasonable. We're married. That business is. It's ours. The old me would have argued. The new me who had read a dead man's final love letter disguised as a will felt something snap neatly into place. No, I said. It's mine, he laughed, short and disbelieving. Don't be dramatic. I'm filing for divorce, I said. Silence. Then his voice turned cold. You do that and you'll regret it. I already regret staying, I replied. He hung up. I stared at my phone, my hand steady. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my spine belonged to me. My son, Daniel, was less cruel but more complicated. He drove out 2 days later, worried lines cutting into his forehead. Mom, he said, sitting across from me at the same kitchen table where my mother used to count pills. You can't just uproot your whole life. What life? I asked lightly. The one where your father forgets my name when he introduces me at parties? Daniel winced. He's still my dad, and I'm still your mother, I said. Which doesn't mean I have to disappear into babysitting and casseroles until I die. His face tightened. The kids love you. Emma cries when you leave. We need you. There it was. We need you. Need again. Always need. I love them, I said, softer. But I am not your solution. I'm not a permanent caregiver you can keep in a drawer. Daniel's eyes filled with frustration. You're being selfish. I smiled, sharp and tired. Good. It's about time I tried it. He left angry, and I cried after he drove away, not because he was wrong, but because motherhood comes with invisible cords that tighten whenever you try to run. Still, I packed. I signed divorce papers, and I drove back to Sebastian's town with my life in boxes and my heart on a strange kind of fire. The winery staff did not greet me like a new owner. They greeted me like an inconvenience. On my first day, I walked into the tasting room, a beautiful space with dark wood, elegant lighting, bottles lined like soldiers. The smell of oak and fermented fruit wrapped around me. A woman behind the counter glanced up and then down at my shoes as if I'd tracked in mud. You lost? She asked. I'm Olivia Hart, I said. I'm the new owner. Her expression did not change. Right. A man in a work shirt came in from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. He was tall, with hair gone silver at the temples and eyes that had seen too many harvest seasons to be impressed by anyone. He looked at me like I'd claimed the moon. You're Olivia, he said, not quite a question. Yes. I'm Adam, he said, Sebastian's friend. The word friend landed like a locked door. His gaze was steady and unfriendly. Sebastian never mentioned you. I lifted an eyebrow. I'm not surprised. People don't like to talk about their biggest mistakes. His jaw tightened. This place isn't a hobby, Mrs. Hart. It's not a vanity project. It's people's livelihoods. I know, I said, and I won't destroy it. He crossed his arms. Then sell it. I laughed once short. Absolutely not. His eyes narrowed. You don't know the first thing about winemaking. I know the first thing about being underestimated, I said. And that's usually the part where people stop paying attention long enough for you to surprise them. Adam stared at me as if trying to decide whether I was brave or ridiculous. Sebastian built this with his own hands, he said. He cared about every vine, and he left it to me, I replied softly. So either he believed I could honor it, or he wanted to ruin me from the grave. Adam's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Which do you think it is? He asked. I think Sebastian never did anything without purpose, I said. And I think you're going to help me, whether you like me or not. Adam's eyes flashed. Why would I help you? I met his gaze. Because you loved him. And because if you don't help me, you're punishing him, not me. He held my stare a beat longer than necessary. Then he turned abruptly. We'll see, he said, and walked away. Hostility has a sound. It's the quiet after a door closes. I threw myself into learning like my life depended on it because maybe it did. I spent mornings in the vineyard, asking questions until the workers couldn't ignore me without looking childish. I watched pruning, irrigation, pest control. I learned to recognize the subtle differences between vines the way some women recognize differences between perfume notes. I spent afternoons with the accountant, digging into numbers. Sebastian had built a strong business, but there were cracks areas he'd neglected out of stubbornness or sentiment. I spent nights reading until my eyes burned. Soil chemistry, fermentation, barrel aging, marketing trends. I watched winemaking videos, listened to industry podcasts, wrote notes like a college student half my age. The staff kept waiting for me to fail, so I didn't. On week 3, I made my first decision that mattered. The distribution contract Sebastian had held was safe but limiting, keeping us in certain markets and choking potential growth. Adam argued against changing anything. Sebastian liked that distributor, he said in the office, voice sharp. Sebastian also liked broken boots, I replied. It doesn't mean it's smart to keep wearing them. He glared. You're arrogant. I smiled. No, Adam, I'm terrified. But I refused to let terror make my decisions. I negotiated a new contract, expanding our reach. It was risky. It worked. Sales rose. The staff looked at me differently after that, not warmly, not yet, but with the reluctant respect people give a storm when it doesn't pass. One afternoon, as I stood in the vineyard reviewing rows with a foreman, Adam approached with a clipboard. We're going to need to trellis the east section, he said. I nodded. Show me. He hesitated, then handed me the clipboard. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing, except it was something. It was the first time I felt a flicker of heat in my body that wasn't anger or grief. It startled me. I hadn't realized I could still feel that way. I thought that part of me had been packed away with my wedding dress and my obedience. Adam cleared his throat. You learn fast. I looked up at him. So do you. He frowned. Me? Yes, I said. You're learning I'm not your enemy. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened by half a shade. That night, he invited me to dinner. Not in a romantic way, at least not officially. It was more like a ceasefire meal. We sat at a small restaurant overlooking the river, and Adam surprised me by laughing at my jokes. Real laughter, not polite chuckles. When I teased him about his constant scowl, he admitted, grudgingly, that Sebastian used to call him the human thundercloud. You miss him, I said quietly. Adam's face tightened, and he stared at his plate. Every day. I swallowed. I'm sorry. He looked up. Why do you care? The question was blunt, but underneath it was something tender and confused. Because I'm living in the shadow of a man who loved me, I said honestly. And because you were his family, even if the blood relatives aren't. Adam's jaw worked. You broke his heart. The words hit hard, but they didn't break me. I did, I said. And I broke mine too. Adam watched me as if he'd expected excuses and got truth instead. He leaned back slowly. You really divorced your husband? He asked. Yes, I said. It's filed. It's real. He nodded once, like he'd been waiting for that answer before allowing himself to feel something. After dinner, he walked me to my car. The night air was warm, and the town smelled like summer and wood smoke. He didn't kiss me then, but when he said, "Drive safe, Olivia," my name sounded different in his mouth, less like a challenge, more like a promise. I moved into my parents' old house because it was mine, because it was close, because it felt like reclaiming something. The place needed work. New paint, new floors, new life. Adam showed up one Saturday with tools. I'm not handy, I warned him. He looked at my peeling porch railing. Neither is your house. We worked all day. We argued about paint colors. We laughed when I dropped a brush and splattered white paint across my jeans. At one point, he stood behind me on a ladder, steadying it with both hands, and I felt the solidness of him, his presence like an anchor. I climbed down, turned, and found his face close. It happened so naturally it felt inevitable. His hand on my waist, my fingers gripping his shirt, the first kiss like a question neither of us had the patience to ask out loud. It wasn't young love frantic. It was adult love hungry. It was the kiss of two people who had lost time and wanted to steal it back. Afterwards, we stood in the doorway, breathless and slightly stunned. "This is complicated," I murmured. Adam's mouth curved. "Everything worth having is." I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt alive. Oliver came to town in late September. I didn't expect him. I didn't warn Adam. I didn't even think Oliver would bother. In my mind, he was too proud to chase anything he couldn't control. But pride is a strange animal. Sometimes it chases just to prove it still has teeth. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Oliver standing there in an expensive coat, as if he'd stepped out of a magazine and into my life by mistake. "Olivia," he said, eyes scanning the house behind me. "So this is where you ran off to?" "I didn't run," I replied. "I relocated." He smiled tightly. "Cute. What are you doing here?" I asked. He stepped forward, forcing me to step back. "You thought you could just leave, take a business, take money, take a whole new life, and I'd let you?" I lifted my chin. "You don't get to let me do anything." His gaze flicked to the hallway where Adam's boots sat by the door. A muscle jumped in Oliver's cheek. "Who's here?" "Someone," I said, voice calm. "And if you raise your voice, I'll call the police." Oliver laughed, then leaned close. "You won't. You've never been that kind of woman." The old Olivia might have flinched. The new Olivia stepped closer and smiled. "People change," I said, "especially when they get tired of being treated like furniture." Before he could respond, Adam appeared in the hallway, shirt sleeves rolled up, paint on his forearm. He stopped short when he saw Oliver. "What's going on?" Adam asked. Oliver's eyes lit with a cruel kind of satisfaction. He stepped forward, voice loud, theatrical. "I'll tell you what's going on. She's my wife." Adam's face went still. Oliver jabbed a finger toward him. "And you're nobody, Oliver," I snapped. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Adam, as if my presence didn't matter. "We should be together," he declared. "This little phase you're having, it's over." Adam's gaze locked on mine, shock and hurt flickering. "You told me you were divorced." "I am," I said quickly. "The papers are filed. It's legal." "He's just what?" Adam interrupted, voice tight. "Just still your husband?" Oliver smiled like a man watching two people drown. "See, even he knows." I stepped toward Adam. "Adam, listen to me." But Adam backed away as if my words were something that could stain him. His jaw clenched. "You lied by omission." "I didn't," I insisted. "I told you it was done." "It is done." He's trying to what?" Adam demanded. "To do what he just did. Walk in and claim you like property." Oliver spread his arms. "Because she is. Because she always will be." Something in me snapped. I turned to Oliver, voice low and lethal. "Get out of my house." Oliver's eyes narrowed. "Olivia now," I said, and pointed at the door. "Before I show you exactly how much I've changed." For a second, I thought he might refuse. Then he gave a small, contemptuous laugh. He looked at Adam one last time. "Enjoy your borrowed time," he said. Then he walked out like he owned the air. Silence rushed in behind him, heavy and sharp. Adam stared at the door as if he wanted to punch it, then turned back to me, eyes dark with betrayal. "I am divorced," I said again, quieter now. "He's trying to separate me from anyone who might love you." Adam finished, bitter. I swallowed hard. "Yes." Adam's shoulders rose and fell like he was trying to breathe through a storm. "I thought you chose me," he said, "but I feel like I stepped into someone else's marriage and didn't even know it." "You didn't," I whispered. "You didn't." He shook his head, eyes shining with anger and pain. "If you'd told me he was the kind of man who would show up like that, I didn't know he would," I said. Adam's lips pressed into a thin line. "I can't do this." My stomach dropped. "Adam," he stepped backward, already leaving, already building the wall. "I'm not going to be another man in your life fighting for space," he said. "I'm not going to be a weapon your husband uses against you." "He's not my husband," I pleaded. "He's my past." Adam's eyes flicked to mine, softening for half a second, as if he wanted to believe me. Then the softness vanished. "Good luck with your future," he said, and walked out. The door closed, and the sound of it felt like a vineyard gate slamming shut. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, paint smell in the air, my heart thudding like it didn't know where to go. Outside, the evening light drained from the sky, and for the first time since I'd arrived in town, I wondered if Sebastian had left me a gift or a test I was about to fail. Adam didn't answer my calls. He didn't answer my texts either, and I sent them anyway because when you're 57 and you've finally dared to want something, pride becomes a smaller god. I typed, "Adam, please talk to me." Then, Oliver is doing what he's always done, trying to own the air around me. Then, after 2 hours of staring at the screen like it might bloom into mercy, "I'm sorry I didn't warn you what kind of man he is. But I didn't lie to you. I'm divorced." No bubbles, no reply, not even the cruelty of a "leave me alone." The next morning I drove to the winery anyway, because heartbreak doesn't pay payroll. The team watched me like they were waiting for my knees to buckle. For weeks I'd felt their hostility soften into reluctant respect, Olivia the owner turning into Olivia the worker. But now I was Olivia the woman who got dumped, and some people can't resist a crack in the marble. I didn't give them one. I walked the rows, spoke to the foreman, checked irrigation schedules. I sat with the accountant and signed what needed signing. I did the boring, unromantic things that keep a dream alive. Still, grief is a clever animal. It hides under your ribs and chews quietly. At night, in my parents' house, I moved through rooms that still held the echo of old rules. My mother's voice saying, "Don't embarrass us." My father's voice saying, "Be practical." I painted the living room anyway. I scrubbed the kitchen cabinets. I changed the curtains. I made the house look like a place a woman lived on purpose, not a museum of obedience. 3 days after Oliver's ambush, Marina stopped by with groceries I hadn't asked for. "You look like you're swallowing knives," she observed, placing a bag of apples on the counter. "I feel like it," I said. She leaned against the sink. "Adam's been angry." "I noticed," I replied dryly. Marina's eyes softened. "He's scared, Olivia. He watched Sebastian carry you like a secret wound for years. He's terrified you'll do the same thing to him." I turned away so she wouldn't see my face twist. "I didn't do anything to Sebastian. I did it to myself." "That's not how men like them experience it," Marina said. "They love like it's a decision carved into stone." I swallowed. "And men like Oliver love like it's a contract." Marina nodded once. "Exactly." That night I sat at my kitchen table with the divorce decree printed out, official, stamped, undeniable. I scanned it like a holy text. Then I did something I hadn't done in 40 years. I wrote a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. Pen on paper. "Adam," I wrote, "I'm not asking you to forgive me for not predicting Oliver's cruelty. I'm asking you to believe one thing. My life is mine now. If you come back, you come to a woman who is not owned." I didn't send it. I folded it and placed it in a drawer, because I wasn't sure if sending it was courage or begging. And I have always been allergic to begging. A week later, I saw her. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The tasting room had been busy, and I'd slipped out for coffee in town to escape the constant smell of oak and expectation. The cafe was small, warm, loud with the chatter of people who thought their lives were stable. I ordered my coffee and turned, and there he was, sitting at a corner table. Adam. Across from him sat a woman about 40, maybe younger, with glossy hair and a laugh that seemed practiced. Her hand rested on his forearm like she had a right to it. I felt the air leave my lungs, not dramatically, not like in movies, just quietly, like my body decided breathing was optional. Adam's eyes lifted and met mine. For a moment, the whole calf seemed to tilt. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. His expression tightened with something like regret. And then he looked away down at his cup, at the table, anywhere except me. The woman followed his glance, spotted me, and gave a quick scan from head to toe. She offered a smile that was polite the way a closed door is polite. I nodded once, because my mother taught me manners and my pain didn't get to cancel them. Then I turned back to the counter, picked up my coffee, and walked out as if my spine were made of steel. I didn't cry until I was home. I cried the way women cry when they're alone, quiet. Furious tears pressed into a dish towel so the house doesn't hear. I hated myself for caring. I hated Adam for being hurt enough to replace me. And I hated Oliver most of all, because I could see his fingerprints all over this without him even being in the room. "If you're not mine," he had always seemed to say without words, "you'll be nobody's." I sat on the floor, back against the cabinets, and let the sobs come until they ran out of fuel. Then I wiped my face, stood up, and washed my hands because I had learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to act like survival is your job. The next day, Adam didn't come to the winery. The day after, he did. He kept his distance. He spoke only when necessary. He looked at me like I was a question he didn't want to answer. By the end of the week, I couldn't take the silent war. I found him near the barrel room, checking something on a clipboard. Adam, I said. He didn't look up. Olivia, I saw you. His pen paused. Okay, in the caf, he exhaled through his nose, like a man trying to keep a lid on boiling water. Okay, you're dating someone. He finally looked up then, eyes sharp. And it hurts, I said simply. His jaw tightened. You think I'm doing this to hurt you? It feels like it, I replied. He stared at me a long second, then his shoulders sagged, just slightly, the first crack in his armor. I did it because I was angry, he admitted. Because I wanted to prove I could walk away. Because I wanted to be untouched. That's impossible, I said. He gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, I found that out. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. Adam, I'm divorced. I have proof. I didn't lie to you. His eyes flickered. I know. You know? My anger flared. Then why? Because it wasn't about the paperwork. He snapped softly. It was about seeing him in your doorway like he owned you. And seeing you standing there looking like a woman who had spent her whole life being claimed. The words stung, but they weren't wrong. I swallowed. I am not that woman anymore. He looked at me like he wanted to believe it but didn't trust his own desire. I'm trying, he said. I'm trying to get past it. Trying while you sit in cafes with her? I asked, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. Adam's eyes narrowed. Don't. I lifted my chin. Don't what? Tell the truth? Ask for dignity? He held my stare, then looked away. I shouldn't have done it, he said, voice rough. But I did. I nodded once. Fine. I turned and walked away before my pride melted. That night, I received a message from Oliver. Just one sentence. You'll come back. They always do. I stared at it until my hands went cold. Then I did something I'd never done in my marriage. I replied, not this time. I blocked him. It felt like slamming a door on a storm. 2 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., there was a knock. Not loud, not polite. The kind of knock you make when you don't want the whole world to witness your desperation. I slipped on a robe and walked downstairs, heart hammering. When I opened the door, Adam stood on my porch. His hair was mussed, his eyes red like he hadn't slept, and his hands were shoved into his jacket pockets like he needed to hold himself together. Olivia, he breathed. What are you doing here? I asked, though my voice gave me away. He didn't step inside. He didn't assume anything. He looked at me like a man who had finally found the edge of his own pride and decided to jump. I can't live like this, he said. With insomnia? I tried to joke, because humor has always been my shield. He shook his head, barely smiling. Without you. The words landed heavy. I folded my arms, not because I was cold, but because if I didn't hold myself, I might fall into him. You have someone, I said. Adam swallowed. Not anymore. He pulled out his phone, screen glowing in the dark. I wrote her a message, told her it was over. He held the phone out like evidence, like confession. I glanced at it. I didn't need to read every word. The meaning was enough. She didn't deserve to be used, he said quietly. And I don't deserve you if I'm the kind of man who uses someone else to punish himself. My throat tightened. He stepped closer, still on the porch, still not crossing the threshold. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I let your past make me cruel. I'm sorry I didn't ask questions, didn't listen, didn't give you a chance to show me who you are now. I stared at him for a long time. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pull him inside and erase the last 2 weeks with kisses and forgiveness. But something in me, something hard-earned and furious, stood up straight. I can't, I said. Adam's face crumpled, just slightly. Olivia, I saw you kissing her, I said, voice steady even as my heart shook. Not in my imagination, in real life, in the same town where I'm trying to build a new life. His eyes closed. I know. And you looked away from me, I continued. Like I was nothing. Like you were a mistake, he finished, voice rough. I know. I hate myself for that. I nodded, tears burning but not falling. I've lived with a man who made me feel replaceable for 40 years. I will not volunteer for that feeling again. Adam stepped down off the porch step, as if making space between us would keep him from collapsing. So that's it? He asked softly. You're done with me? I stared at him, and the truth was painful in its complexity. I'm not done, I whispered. That's the problem. Adam's eyes shone. Olivia, please, I lifted my hand. No, the word was gentle, but it was a wall. I need you to leave, I said. Not because I don't love you, because I do. And because if I let you back in right now, I'll be teaching myself the old lesson again that my pain doesn't matter as much as keeping a man. Adam's jaw trembled. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I said. But you did. He stood there a moment longer, staring at me like he might find a loophole. Then he nodded once sharply, like taking a blow. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He turned and walked away down the porch steps into the night. I watched him go until the darkness swallowed his shape. Then I closed the door and slid down against it, silent tears finally spilling because strength doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you cry and still keep the boundary. The next month was harvest season, busy enough to keep me from drowning. The vineyard became my therapy. The rows of vines didn't care about my heartbreak. They demanded attention, patience, leadership. Under my direction, we launched a small tasting series local musicians on weekends, paired with limited batch releases. I worked with a designer to refresh the label, honoring Sebastian's original style but modernizing it. I negotiated a partnership with a boutique hotel chain that wanted local wines in all their restaurants. Adam stayed professional, distant, useful, like a man trying to respect a door you've closed even while standing outside it. Sometimes I caught him watching me when he thought I wouldn't notice. Sometimes I caught myself doing the same. One evening, Marina came by with a bottle and 2 glasses. You're doing it, she said, watching me pour. Doing what? I asked. Living, she replied. Sebastian would be maddeningly proud. I laughed, and it came out shaky. He would also probably make a joke about leaving me only $4,000 in the account. Marina smiled. He'd say it kept you hungry. I lifted my glass. To hunger then. We drank. And for the first time since the calf, I felt something like hope. Then, in early December, the lawsuit arrived. Sebastian's relatives, led by Uncle Lucien, filed to contest the will. They claimed Sebastian was manipulated. They claimed he was not in his right mind. They claimed I was an opportunist who had reappeared conveniently after his death. It was disgusting. It was also predictable. I sat in my office staring at the papers until my eyes blurred. This was the part of life where the old Olivia would have panicked, called Oliver, begged him for help. Instead, I called a lawyer, a good one, a woman. When she arrived, she shook my hand firmly. They want to scare you, she said, scanning the documents. That's their whole strategy. I'm not scared, I replied, surprised to hear how true it was. The lawyer arched an eyebrow. Good, because legally, they don't have much. But emotionally, they'll try to break you. They'll have to get in line, I said, thinking of Oliver. That night, I went home exhausted and found Adam waiting on my porch, hands in his pockets, face grim. I heard, he said. News travels fast in small towns, I replied. He nodded. They're going to come after you hard. I can handle it. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'm here. I stared at him. You're here because you're worried about the winery. He smiled faintly. I'm here because I'm worried about you. I didn't invite him in. Not yet. But I didn't tell him to leave either. He cleared his throat. I have something for you, he said, and held out an envelope. I took it, confused. What is this? A copy, he said. Sebastian wrote it a year before he died. He kept it in his safe. Marina gave me access when we were sorting things. I opened the envelope, hands suddenly trembling. Inside was a letter. To me, my name written in Sebastian's handwriting, ink slightly faded, like the past reaching across time. I looked up at Adam. Why are you giving me this? Because it might help in court, he said, then softer. And because it might help you. My throat closed. Adam stepped back. Read it, he said. And Olivia, whatever happens with us, I want you to know I'm on your side. Fully, no conditions. I swallowed hard. Adam, he lifted a hand. Don't, not tonight. Just, read it. He turned and walked away again, leaving me with the envelope like a match in my palm. I sat at my kitchen table and opened Sebastian's letter. My eyes moved over his words, and with each line, something in me loosened, grief and guilt untangling like knots finally given patience. Sebastian wrote about loving me without owning me, about choosing not to marry because he didn't want to replace love with convenience, about leaving me the winery not as a punishment, but as a second chance. Not for us, he wrote, but for you. And then, the line that made me press my hand to my mouth. If you ever doubt whether you deserve this, Olivia, remember, the only person who never deserved you is the one who convinced you to stay small. Oliver. Sebastian didn't name him, but I felt it like a spotlight. I cried. quietly, fully. Then I wiped my face, stood up, and placed Sebastian's letter in a folder with the legal documents. Because if the relatives wanted a fight, they were about to learn something. I had spent decades surviving a man who treated love like a ledger. I was not going to lose now to people who treated grief like a lottery ticket. The court hearing came in January. Marina sat behind me, hand on my shoulder like a brace. Adam sat on the other side of the aisle, not looking at me, but present, solid as oak. Lucian and the cousins were dressed like they'd come to a funeral for my reputation. Their lawyer painted me as a manipulator, a seductress, a woman who had re-entered the picture to steal a legacy. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. When my lawyer presented Sebastian's letter, his handwriting, his clear, lucid intentions, the judge's expression shifted. Then Marina testified about Sebastian's state of mind. Then Adam testified. That part surprised everyone. He stood up, tall and calm, and said, Sebastian was the sharpest man I ever knew. He made this decision with full awareness. And he did it because Olivia is the only person who ever made him dream bigger than his own pain. Lucian's lawyer tried to rattle him. So you're close to Miss Hart? He asked with a thin smile. Adam's eyes flicked toward me for the first time in weeks. Yes, he said simply. I am. And you benefit if she keeps the winery, don't you? Adam's mouth tightened. I benefit if Sebastian's legacy stays intact. And it will not stay intact in the hands of people who see it as a cash out. The judge ruled within 2 weeks. The will stood. The winery remained mine. Lucian left the courthouse with a face like spoiled milk. I walked outside into the cold winter air and laughed, an actual laugh, because the sky looked too bright to waste on bitterness. Marina hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. You did it, she whispered. No, I said, wiping tears from my cheeks. Sebastian did. Adam hovered a few feet away, hands in his pockets, like he didn't know if he was allowed to come closer. I looked at him. He looked back. And for the first time since Oliver's ambush, there was no anger in his eyes, only longing and something like hope. A week later, I found Adam in the barrel room after closing. He was alone, checking labels, the warm scent of oak and wine surrounding him like a memory. Adam, I said. He turned, cautious. Olivia. I walked closer, slow. Thank you, I said, for testifying. He nodded. It was the truth. I swallowed. And for giving me Sebastian's letter. His gaze softened. You needed it. I took a breath, feeling the old fear, the fear of wanting too much, the fear of being hurt, the fear of repeating patterns. Then I remembered Oliver's message. They always do. And I remembered my reply. Not this time. I wasn't going back to smallness, but I also wasn't going to build a fortress so high nothing good could reach me. I haven't forgiven you, I said honestly. Adam's face tightened, pain flickering. I know, he said quietly. But I've watched you, I continued. I've watched you show up even when I pushed you away. I've watched you respect my boundaries. I've watched you choose integrity after you failed. Adam's eyes shone. Olivia, I lifted a hand. Let me finish. He nodded, throat tight. I don't want a love that comes easy, I said. I want a love that comes right. I stepped closer, close enough to feel his warmth. If you want a second chance, I whispered, you'll have to earn it slowly. Adam's breath shook. I will. And you'll have to understand something, I added. I'm not asking you to never make mistakes. I'm asking you to never punish me for someone else's sins. Adam's eyes closed, and when he opened them, there were tears there, small, honest. I swear, he said. I stared at him a long moment. Then, because I am a woman who has wasted enough years being obedient to fear, I reached up, took his face in my hands, and kissed him. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't forgiving everything. It was choosing a beginning. When we pulled apart, Adam rested his forehead against mine. I thought I lost you, he whispered. You almost did, I replied, voice steady. But fate owes me something after 40 years of nonsense. Adam laughed softly through his tears. Does it? Oh yes, I said, wiping his cheek with my thumb. And I intend to collect. Spring came like a reward. The vines woke up, buds appeared, the air softened. Adam and I moved carefully, like people learning a new dance. We did dinners. We did long walks through the vineyard. We did conversations we should have had from the start. One night he said, tell me what you need. I looked at him across my kitchen table, the same table where I'd cried, where I'd read Sebastian's letter, where I'd decided to live. I need to know, I said, that if Oliver ever tries again, you won't let him rewrite my story. Adam's jaw tightened. He doesn't get a pen near you. I smiled. Good. A month later, Oliver did try. He showed up at the winery angry, suited, still playing the role of man who owns things. He demanded to speak to me. Adam stood in front of him at the entrance like a gate. Oliver sneered. Move. This is between me and my wife. Adam didn't move. She's not your wife, he said calmly. She's not your anything. Oliver's eyes flashed. You think you can stop me? Adam's voice stayed quiet, deadly. I don't have to. The law already did. And so did she. I stepped out then, standing beside Adam. Oliver's gaze flicked between us, truly realizing that his old power was gone. You'll regret this, he hissed at me. I smiled sweetly. I already did, I said. For 40 years. Then I turned my back on him and walked away. Adam's hand found mine. Oliver left, and the dust he kicked up settled without consequence. On a warm May evening, the winery hosted a tasting event. Music drifted over the vines. Glasses clinked. People laughed. Marina stood near the porch with a glass raised, watching me with eyes full of complicated joy. You did it, she mouthed. I looked out over the vineyard, Sebastian's legacy, now my purpose, and I felt something settle deep in my chest. Not just happiness. Ownership of my own life. Adam came up behind me, slipped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin near my shoulder. Sebastian would have loved this, he murmured. I leaned back into him. Yes, I said softly, and he would have been unbearable about it. Adam chuckled. He'd say, see, I told you she'd be unstoppable. I lifted my glass toward the rows of vines glowing in sunset. To second chances, I whispered. Adam kissed my temple. To you. And in that moment, standing in the town where I'd once been too obedient to run, I understood something that felt like redemption. Love doesn't always come back the same way it left. Sometimes it comes back wiser. Sometimes it comes back after you've become the kind of woman who can hold it without losing herself. And sometimes, when fate finally decides you've paid enough, it gives you the kind of happy ending that isn't a fairy tale. It's a victory.